everyone, it's Jananie from the channel This Story Ain't Over, and welcome back to another episode of #EpicBookRecs. So this is the monthly series that I do here on the Epic Reads channel where I recommend a bunch of books based on a certain theme. So we've done a lot of fun themes before, so go check out the playlist in the description down below if you want to watch the other videos. But for today's video, I thought it would be a lot of fun to recommend some sci-fi YA books. So I've done this video once before for this series, and you can check out that video in the playlist, but I wanted to recommend some other books than the ones that I recommended before, and there's a few that I actually haven't read yet that I really want to pick up, and I thought I might recommend to you guys as well. So without further ado, let's just get right in. So of all the books that I'm going to recommend in this video, this first pick is actually not the most sci-fi book I've ever read. It is very much on the contemporary side, but it has like a little dash of like sci-fi-ness, and I wanted to recommend it regardless, and that book is They Both Die at the End by Adam Silvera. This is one of my favorite YA contemporaries / sci-fis because of the entire concept that it is hinged on. So in this kind of alternate version of our world, there is something called the Death Cast, which is this service that calls you 24 hours before you're gonna die. So they let you know that you're gonna die within the next 24 hours. They don't tell you how you're gonna die or like when exactly it's gonna happen, but they just let you know so you can get yourself in order and maybe panic yourself to death. And it is a really interesting concept, and I loved the way that Adam Silvera kind of sets up this story. And I do think it's a bit sci-fi in that sense because it is talking about a technology that has kind of changed the landscape, which is part of what sci-fi does. And so in this wonderfully tear-jerking book, the two main characters are like two teens from New York, and they both find out that they're gonna die, and so they meet over this app that has kind of surfaced since the Death Cast surfaced, which is called the Last Friend app. And it basically pairs you up with someone who is also going to die within 24 hours so that you have someone to sort of connect to. Another thing I love about this book is just the way that the two main characters are very different from each other in terms of their personalities. Mateo is very introverted and kind of anxious, whereas Rufus I would characterize as more extroverted and has a lot of friends, but is also struggling with, you know, his current situation. And despite meeting on the Last Friend app, the two of them don't really know what to expect from their meeting, and they end up spending most of that last day together. And it's just a really heartwarming book, but also like interesting and like crazy to think about. If you knew you were gonna die within 24 hours, how would you live your life differently? Like, thinking about that is just really interesting, and I love that sci-fi makes you think of things like that. Alright, the next book is very much more of a traditional sci-fi, and that is Cinder by Marissa Meyer. I have recommended this before. It is an older YA pick. It's been out for quite a few years, and it was one of my favorites in high school, and I loved it because it paired up two of my favorite things, which is sci-fi and fairy tales. So for each book in this series, the Lunar Chronicles, there's a different main character, and each book is a bit of a retelling of a different fairy tale. So as you can tell, this first one is of Cinderella, and what's so cool about this series is that it takes these kind of fairy tales that you usually think of in a sort of fantasy landscape, or you might, you know, try to repurpose it into a modern day landscape. This actually takes it like hundreds of years into the future, into a version of our world that seems very familiar but also very different. And in this world there are cyborgs and there are kingdoms on the moon, and it's just a really interesting landscape to be in. And our main character in the first book, and actually across the whole series, is Cinder. She's basically our Cinderella. She has a not so nice stepmother and step siblings, and Cinder is a cyborg, which I absolutely loved. And there's like parts where, you know, she's talking about her body and how it's different from a regular human. She can't cry, she can like remove her arms and like feet. And this book is actually set in China in like a futuristic version that's called New Beijing, and Cinder is visited at her like market stall by the Prince of New Beijing, and he is asking her to fix his android, who is carrying a secret, very important message. But he's obviously disguised himself as he's come to this market, and she's trying to act cool, but she knows there's something else afoot. And there's also talk of a plague that's ravaging the land, and that plays a large element into the book. But yeah, this is a really, really cool series, and I love the sci-fi elements, and I just love how they're woven into the fairy tales overall. So yeah, highly, highly recommend. Alright, this next one is a recent fave of mine, and it's by an author that I really admire, and that is Sky Hunter by Marie Lu. So this is her newest book and her newest sort of sci-fi dystopian. So this book is set in sort of a far, far future version of our world that's sort of a dystopian version. You know, things have gotten worse. And in this version of the world, there's this country called the Karenza Federation that has started to kind of conquer all the lands and countries around it and really just brutally take things over. And so Mara is one of the last free standing nations. And our main character, Talon, and her mother were young refugees from another neighboring country that was taken over by Carenza, and they've now come to Mara and are living there. And so Talon has spent most of her life in Mara, and when she went through that like very traumatic experience of fleeing her homeland, she sort of lost a bit of her memory, and she also lost her ability to speak. And throughout the book, Talon is actually signing to people, and she's actually something called a striker. So strikers for Mara are these like elite task force military people who are specifically trained to fight the Carenza Federation's mutant monster things that are called ghosts. And each striker has a partner that they are meant to stay with, because ghosts have this very strange and horrible quality of biting like other people, and they can turn someone into a ghost. And so strikers always have a partner to make sure that if their partner gets bitten, that they can kill their partner to prevent them from turning into a ghost. But things obviously go awry when Talon's partner gets overwhelmed by a ghost at the very beginning of the book, and Talon is left partnerless, and Mara has recently found a ghost that has been captured and has not been killed, and they've never actually captured one alive, but this one seems a little bit different, and Talon sort of vouches for the ghost, thinking that he might have some answers to all the questions that they have about the Carenza Federation. And what blossoms from there is an unlikely friendship, but also a lot of secrets kind of being revealed. And it's just this really interesting sci-fi world, and being in this landscape that feels very similar and reminiscent of ours, but also we know that it's a lot farther in the future, and we know something went wrong in between there. And I think it's super, super interesting, and I love Talon as a character. She's a very introspective character, and I loved her bond with the ghosts that she meets, and it's just a really wonderful book, and I can't wait for the next book coming out soon. Alright, the next book that I want to recommend involves some time travel, and that is Invictus by Ryan Groudon. So this is such a fun book. It is both a like heist story, but also a time travel story, and it really reminds me of DC's Legends of Tomorrow, if you've ever watched that show. So our main character is Far, who is this kid who was born out of time. So his mother was a time traveler, and in like the time that he lives in, it's like very far in the future, people have figured out how to time travel. And so his mother is one of these like certified time travelers, and she ended up falling for a gladiator in Rome when she traveled back in time there. And Far has always wanted to be like his mother, to be one of these like official time travelers for the government. But when he fails his entrance exam, he is sort of lost and doesn't know what to do. And he ends up settling for a job in the black market to steal valuables from the past for these like wealthy people in the future. And so he gathers up his crew of his different friends who have different strengths, and they all kind of travel back in time to go steal things and bring them back to the future. And it's this really interesting story as they tumble through time trying to steal things, but also get caught up in a very interesting mystery that involves another character as well. This is definitely a really fun book if you like large casts, if you like multi-POV books, and if you like a little bit of time travel. Alright, this next book is both a sci-fi but also really feels like a fantasy, and that is Mirage by Somaya Dowd. I absolutely love this book. It's a very fast read, and it's a bit of a romance but also feels a little bit like a fantasy, but it's actually at its core a sci-fi. And the reason I say it's a sci-fi is because it's set across a whole galaxy that has sort of been conquered by the brutal Vithek Empire. And our main character, Amani, is this young girl on a moon that has been conquered by the Vithek Empire, and she's always just dreamed of, you know, something beyond her small moon. But when officials from the Vithek Empire come to her solitary moon and kidnap her, they take her back to the royal palace to the very cruel Princess Maram. So Maram is this princess, and everyone hates her because she's just so horrible and horrifying, and because of that, she has a lot of death threats against her life. And what we learn is that Amani actually looks exactly like Maram. And so Amani has been kidnapped to become the body double of Maram against her will, and to kind of go to social events and public things in place of Maram so that Maram doesn't get killed. And so Amani is sort of forced into the situation, forced to put on this masquerade away from her family, and she starts to form this unlikely bond with Maram as they both try to understand each other, but also as Amani is kind of trapped there as her hostage. And the whole thing is just quite interesting and complicated, but also something I've never read before, which I thought was super interesting. And the entire time you're sort of trying to figure out why Mani looks exactly like Maram. And as I said, this does have a bit of a romance, but there's also a little bit of a revolutionary aspect to this book because there's a lot of people who have been conquered by the Vithaka Empire and want to see it fall down. Alright, the next book that I want to recommend is one I haven't read yet myself, but I really want to pick up, and that is Want by Cindy Pon. I've heard so many amazing things about this book, and I found the entire concept to be super interesting. It's set in a futuristic version of our world, and mainly in Taiwan, and it follows our main character Jason, who's this young, poor kid in Taiwan, and he has seen the way that the rich in the city and, you know, in the world have been able to use their money to buy longer lives, and they're able to buy these special suits that protect them from the horrible pollution that plagues like the whole city. And so incensed by the corruption in his city and by his mother's recent death, Jason vows to make sure that he brings the rich down. And of course there's a corporation behind most of the imbalance of wealth in Taiwan, and that is the Jin Corporation, who manufactures these suits. And so Jason is determined to take down the Jin Corporation from the inside, but that involves getting to the daughter of Jin Corp's CEO, Dayu. And when Jason finds himself falling for Dayu, things get a lot more complicated. This also involves some of his friends who he enlists to help him take down the Jin Corporation. There's also some secrets that come along with this, and I think that the whole concept is just so interesting, so I cannot wait to pick it up very soon. Alright, and the last book that I want to recommend today is Goddess in the Machine by Laura Beth Johnson. I thought that the concept of this book is super interesting, so that's why I wanted to recommend it today. I haven't read it yet, but I really want to pick it up soon, and this basically follows her main character, Andra, who is this girl who goes into cryonic sleep expecting to, you know, take a trip across the galaxy and wake up 100 years later, and she does this with a bunch of her friends and family. This is like a bit in the future, but what ends up actually happening is that she wakes up in 3102 after 1,000 years, and she has somehow been separated from her friends and family, and she is alone. And when she wakes up, all of the people around her keep calling her a goddess. They think she's some sort of like mythical magical being, and she can't figure out what's going on. And then one of the other main characters is Zaid, who is the exiled bastard prince of a country or planet, and he knows his planet is dying, and a lot of people are placing a lot of faith on Andra as this goddess to save the planet, but she doesn't have any kind of powers or, you know, mythical abilities, and he is trying to keep this charade alive by helping Andra, but he's also keeping some secrets from her. And I just thought that this was such an interesting concept, the whole idea of very possibly going into cryogenic sleep in the future to expand into the rest of the galaxy, but then ending up waking up 1,000 years later. That's so cool. And also just the idea of how a lot of times technology that is so advanced sometimes starts to feel like magic. And that's what people are thinking of Andra. They think she's some sort of goddess, but really she's just been in cryogenic sleep for 1,000 years. There's a lot of mystery with this whole concept as well, so I'm interested to see how it's gonna go and very excited to pick it up. Alright, but those are all the books that I wanted to recommend today. I really hope you enjoy this video. I'm so excited to pick up Want and Goddess in the Machine, and I really hope you guys will pick up the other books that I recommended as well. But as always, let me know your favorite sci-fi books down below. I would love to hear your recommendations. And thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next episode of #EpicBookRecs. Bye!